Do prepaid burial contracts make sense? I'm Elliot Apple, founder and financial planner of Kindness Financial Planning, and today we're going to talk about death. Bear with me here. I know this is not everybody's favorite topic to talk about, but it is a very important topic, and it is timely for me because my dad passed away last month and he did have a prepaid burial contract. So I want to talk about what I experienced personally and how I've seen it show up in other people's lives and what I've read about them. Now, the short answer here is it's not right for everybody. That's the spoiler alert here, but it can make sense in certain circumstances. In my own case, my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer about 7 years ago, and partway through that process, he decided to buy a prepaid insurance contract. And this was back in 2019, and he passed away in 2023. So about I call it 3.5 years actually ended up passing between that time period. And it was interesting to go back and look at some of the pricing. I'm a financial planning nerd, so I wanted to see, did this make sense from a financial perspective? Were there emotional benefits? And I'm gonna talk a little bit about that. First, the biggest benefit to these policies is everything is taken care of for you. All I had to do was call the funeral arrangement place and say, hey, my dad died, and they took care of the rest. And my dad had already pre-filled everything. So when it came to the death certificate and questions, really it was nothing more than a short phone call and a few emails back and forth regarding some other matters, and it was taken care of. There was nothing for me to fill out. There was no question about what sort of service he wanted. The biggest question we had was whether we wanted to do a viewing or not, which we ended up doing, but really that was it. So from a simplicity perspective, these are wonderful tools because in our case, we got to grieve my dad over the past few years, so there was less of that. But I can imagine for a family who is going through grief suddenly, where maybe the death is unexpected, it would be really challenging to put together everything to do with the funeral arrangements and try to think about what would your loved one would want. And you're doing this while you have brain fog and you have 1,000 other things to do during death. So I really like them from the perspective of the person gets to complete what they want to have happen, and that's it. It is very simple for the survivors. And in terms of paying for it, it's already prepaid. So it wasn't like we needed to pay out of pocket and to get reimbursed from the estate. Something a lot of folks don't realize is when someone passes away, most financial accounts are frozen and you don't have access to them anymore. So you're often paying out of pocket for certain things unless you can get access to it in other ways, or there's a transfer on death account where it's a little easier to process. So from a simplicity perspective, I really like these. Now, where they don't always make sense is if you have someone who's spending time in multiple locations or you're not quite sure where you're gonna live. And the difficulty there is many of these contracts, you're limited to the amount of miles that they will transport a body when someone has passed away. In my dad's case, his contract said it was 35 miles. So anything above 35 miles would have been an additional charge. Now, if you're gonna stick to a certain area and maybe you're going beyond that and it's okay, you'll pay the $3 or $5 a mile or whatever it is, that maybe works for you and your family. But if you're moving across state, that may have less value because it can be very expensive to transport bodies across state, and then you may be out of pocket additional dollars. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for someone who is maybe younger. If you're in your 40s, 50s, maybe even your 60s, sometimes you may decide to move. Maybe grandkids get born and you want to move closer to them, or something happens. Maybe that even happens in your 70s. The main point here is if you anticipate being out of the local area, read the fine print on these contracts and what they entail and what they're actually providing and what additional charges may come into play there. For those who are older though, maybe you're in your 80s or 90s or 70s in poor health, I think this can make a lot of sense for families. You can take care of the payment, you can take care of what you want to have happen, and then it's really as simple as a phone call and going from there. If you are curious about some of the numbers, sometimes I talk to folks and they're really curious, well, I could take that money and I could invest it. For me, it's less about that. Particularly in my dad's case, he's getting cremated. It's not an expensive cost compared to a full burial. We did not do a full burial. It wasn't $10,000 or $20,000. I went back and I looked at my dad's insurance contract, and that's the structure of this. He basically paid for a group whole life policy that turns over funds to the funeral home. So in his case, he paid a little more than $1,400 for a direct cremation, basically the cheapest container possible. It was very bare bones, 3 death certificates. There's a Washington State cremation fee of $8. So all of that added up to a little bit more than $1,400. When I looked at the actual pricing, I'm looking at it over there, it was $1,295 for the direct cremation, and then everything on top of that. If I looked at the pricing today as it stands, it was about $1,000 $3,580. So there was an increase of about 22% over the past, call it 3 to 4 years. So financial perspective, maybe he could have invested these funds and that maybe would have turned out better. But again, the ease of having this already paid for, not having to write a check, not having to pay for more, not having to do one more thing when he died, that's worth any sort of return. Now, if you're going to have a very expensive funeral, maybe it's $30,000 or $40,000, maybe I'd be a little more hesitant to pay for something like this. But even then, just the peace of mind, the fact that it's a higher dollar figure where people may not be able to pay out of pocket for that, may make sense to be able to pay for it. So if you are interested in doing something like this, I would encourage you to talk to your local funeral home or a couple in the area just to see how it's structured. Is it a whole life insurance policy? What does it cover? What can you prepay? What sort of additional charges might be later on? And just seeing if it makes sense. I know this is something people don't want to think about. They often sort of ignore this and put this at the bottom of the list, but it was a real gift to be able to, again, just make a phone call and have it taken care of. It was really one of the more simpler things we had to do when he died, and I'm very grateful for that. So if you are interested in doing that for your own family, I'd encourage you to seek it out. And if you have questions or you have experience with it, drop it in the comments down below. Let me know. I would love to learn more about this as well. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and until next time, take care.